Paranormal. That cannot be explained by scientific methods.
Told of a creature that was 6.5 to 7 feet tall.
The CIA ran secret mind control experiments.
It's a tale of a creature that's been seen by many, but believed by few.
And experts say there have been reported sightings of paranormal activity.
And there was this creature, and it ran down this hill.
They say something was flying over their house, and they have no idea what it was.
How the world's most powerful individuals are actually shape-shifting reptilians.
My scariest ghost hunting experience.
Jason and JV.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Can't handle the truth. Put it down.
Beyond reality. Radio.
Welcome to the world of the unusual, the bizarre, and occasionally the macabre. This is Beyond Reality Radio. Jason and JV are on vacation this week. My name is Bruce Markison. Glad to be filling in for those two gentlemen. And we've got a great show coming up tonight. Really looking forward to this evening's guest. We are going to be talking in depth about the subject of UFOs. And with us, one of the leading experts in this area. His name is Gordon Lohr. He is a UFO researcher, writer, and editor. We're going to be talking about his research and investigations into UFOs. Also, we'll be talking about his years with an organization called NICAP, and that stands for the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And he'll also be talking about the influence of Major Donald E. Keyhoe, and it was really some of the writing of Keyhoe that got Gordon Lohr interested in this subject. Once again, we welcome you to tonight's edition of Beyond Reality Radio. Many ways that you can follow the program. You can certainly go to our website. It is beyondrealityradio.com. We have a chat room there. We encourage you to go in the chat room, offer us your thoughts during the course of the next 2 hours. You can also join us on Facebook at Beyond Reality Radio. Follow us on Snapchat and Instagram. And if you'd like to follow me on Facebook, check out my newly formed page. It's called Bruce Markison's Ghostly Gallery. I post a lot of stuff about horror, supernatural, the paranormal, popular culture. It's another great way to keep tabs on the show, also learn about me. If you go to my page, please like it, please follow it. You're going to make me very happy if you do that. So again, that's Bruce Markison's Ghostly Gallery on Facebook. Coming up later in the week, Tuesday night, our guests, we'll have two of them, Christopher Orapello and Tara Love McGuire. They are witch authors and podcasters. The discussion will center on their new book. It's called Besom, Stang, and Sword, A Guide to Traditional Witchcraft, The Sixfold Path, and the Hidden Landscape. So that'll be tomorrow night's show. On Wednesday, we will have Christopher Fulton. He is the author of the book The Inheritance, Poison Fruit of JFK's Assassination. Fulton had possession of the closest physical evidence to President Kennedy's fatal head wounds and was the first person since Robert F. Kennedy to listen to JFK's secret Oval Office recordings. That should be a fascinating show. That's Wednesday night. And then on Thursday, our guest will be Jonathan Gabriel. He is an author and an infinite investigator. We're going to be talking about synchronicity, connecting to the infinite in a finite existence, and numbers as spiritual connections to the cosmic soup. So that is all coming up this week. Again, Jason and JV have the week off. They're on vacation. My name is Bruce Markison. Glad to be filling in. And we'll take our first break in just a moment here. When we come back, we will begin an in-depth conversation on UFOs. With us, one of the really leading experts in this area, His name is Gordon Lohr, UFO researcher, writer, and editor. Stay with us. We're just getting started on Beyond Reality Radio.
That's what I said now. Princess, who adore you. his head now. You marry him, your father will condone you. How about that now? You marry me, your father will disown you. He'll eat his head now. Marry him or marry me. I'm the one that left the baby, can't you see? I ain't got no future or family tree, but I know what a pretty lover ought to be. I know what a pretty lover ought to be. Said if you want to call me baby, just go ahead now. And if you like to tell me maybe, just go ahead now. And if you wanna buy me flowers, just go ahead now. And if you like to talk for hours, just go ahead now.
You're listening to Beyond Reality Radio. It's a late night Monday. Jason and JV have the night off. They're on vacation this week. My name is Bruce Markison. I'll be filling in as guest host, and tonight the topic will be unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Joining us is one of the experts on the subject. His name is Gordon Lohr. Gordon began his professional writing, editing career as vice president of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, then the world's largest UFO organization. This was back in the mid-1960s. He was responsible for heading a large scientific network of subcommittees that lent its expertise toward solving one of the primary mysteries of the 20th century. Also very interesting, he was an uncredited scientific advisor to the late director Stanley Kubrick on the terrific science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey back in 1967. So his resume, as you can tell, is quite impressive. Joining us now on Beyond Reality Radio is Gordon Lohr. Gordon, welcome to the program. Gordon, are you there? Hello, Gordon, are you there? And for some reason, we don't seem to have Gordon. Let me try the other line just to make sure. Hello, Gordon, are you there? Well, apparently we are still waiting on Gordon. As we wait for that connection, want to tell you a little bit more about Gordon Lohr and what he has done. His books, and he has written many, many books, but they include Connections, A Lifetime Journey Through the World of Celebrity. That came out in the year 2017. He has also written even newer book, 2018, Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth, a UFO Researcher's Odyssey. These books are available at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. You can also write or email Gordon at his email address, and that is gordon.lohr, that's spelled L-O-R-E, at gmail.com. Again, that's gordon.lohr at gmail.com. Many interesting experiences that Gordon has had over the course of his life. For example, back in 1972, he was in the Oval Office of the White House when President Richard Nixon signed the Environmental Protection Agency legislation that would further protect the air and water quality in the United States and its territories. He has been the editor of publications like the Rockwell News. He has written about numerous topics from the Apollo program, the space shuttle, and also about nuclear energy. He has also gotten into other areas as well. From 1992 to 2012, he was a prominent writer, editor in the areas of kidney disease and renal transplantation as well. So a man of much knowledge, many talents. Let's go back to the phones and see if we can reconnect or connect for the first time with Gordon Lohr. Gordon, are you there with us?
Well, it sounded good. I didn't hear the first part, but the last part sounded great. I didn't know I had accomplished that much.
Yeah, we've been talking you up. It's quite a career. Before we get into the subject matter at hand, and I want to obviously get into a serious discussion, but I'm going to begin on a bit of a lighter note. The first time that I was ever introduced to the term UFO, unidentified flying objects, was back in 1974. I was watching the television show The Brady Bunch, and there's an episode, it's pretty famous for Brady Bunch fans and fans of popular culture. It's the UFO episode where Bobby and Peter think they have seen a UFO outside of their bedroom at night. Turns out their older brother Greg is creating a hoax, but Bobby and Peter are so convincing that they're actually able to get the military and scientists to come out to their house. They think it's a legitimate UFO experience, so Greg kind of feels bad about it. He's put himself into some trouble. So this was actually, I was about 9 years old, and this was the first time that I had ever heard of the term UFO. So for me, it started on a lighter note, but let's talk about you. How did your interest in UFOs come to begin?
Well, actually, I had been interested when I was quite young, and I really got more interested when I read the first two books by Major Donald E. Keyhoe. Keyhoe was known as Mr. UFO. He wrote the very first book and the very first article on the subject back in 1950. And I had read his first two books, Flying Saucers Are Real and Flying Saucers from Outer Space, published in 1950 and 53, and I was kind of hooked. But then what really got me was I had my first sighting in 1955 in my little hometown of Solomon's Island on the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. And that's what really got me excited, and I began buying all the books I could on the subject and reading about it and whatnot, and which ended, actually it didn't end there, but I mean, that sort of started my interest in the subject, and it got really kind of fulfilled when I joined the staff of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, in 1965, and got to work with Major Keyhoe and many other people prominent in UFO research.
You were still a youngster when you first read these books?
I'm sorry?
You were still a youngster? This was before you got into adult life when you started reading Keyhoe's books?
No, actually, I was pretty much into adult life. I was still, I guess I was about 20 years old, something like that. So I was pretty much into adult life.
Yeah.
And it really took off after I read Keyhoe's books, and particularly after I had my first sighting in 1955. Actually, that was it was at night, and I was sitting on a long pier out in the middle of the Patuxent River, near where the Patuxent River meets the Chesapeake Bay, and I saw this large lit object, dish shape, that was coming toward me, and it dove into the water, then lifted out of the water, came over the wharf, and actually splashed some water on me, and then flew off and disappeared. And from then on, I was pretty well hooked on the subject, but it was another 10 years before I was able to join the staff at NICAP and really realize my dream of becoming a UFO researcher and investigator.
Yeah, later you came to know Mr. Keyhoe, Major Keyhoe, very well. We're going to talk about that relationship, but for just a couple of minutes, let's focus in on that first experience that you had. You mentioned it was 1955. How long did you see this item, this object in the air, and how long did the entire incident last?
Oh, gosh, it's hard to say. It was so long ago, but I would say no more than about 5 minutes, maybe less than that. It came slowly at first from where the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay meets the Patuxent River, and came slowly along the Patuxent River until it crossed over the laboratory pier. Now, this was late at night, and so I'd say maybe 3 minutes altogether.
Were you scared?
And then it just... Actually, I wasn't. I got a little frightened when they flew right over me, and then actually discharged some water. Now the water could have been dripping from the fact that it had already been in the water, but it seemed like it almost something at the bottom opened and it spilled out some water from there and just happened to hit me.
Yeah.
And I got a little frightened there, but I quickly was just sort of amazed at what I saw, and it quickly disappeared. Now, the Patuxent Naval Air Station is across the river from where I checked with them the next day, and they said they had absolutely nothing that would explain that flying around.
Yeah. Did you stay out there, or did you run home at that point?
No, I was just actually I had a little veranda where you could sit. It was late at night; nobody else was there, and I just sat down and wondered for a while, and I wasn't scared at all. Actually, I thought, my God, this is quite something. It's my first actual UFO sighting, and I'd been hoping to have some sightings because I'd read the 2 books by Keyhoe.
Yeah.
I never dreamed that one day I would actually get to work with him for 5 years.
Yeah. Did you write down any notes from what you saw?
Oh, yeah, I did. I've long since lost them. I think I sent those notes into NICAP, though. I had 2 other sightings, and both in 1958, which I sent into NICAP, and those were also before I joined the staff at NICAP. I can tell you about those briefly if you want.
Yeah, we have about a minute here.
Oh, okay.
A minute before the break. We're going to continue after that.
All right. Well, the first was April 2nd, 1958, and I was returning home from my class at the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore when I saw a large white light hovering over a barn. Then a few minutes later, it began blinking on and off and followed my car for most of the 6 remaining miles to my home in Sullivan's Island. Then it stopped and hovered over another barn. Then a minute or so later, it started to perform some fantastic maneuvers. In an instant, it appeared at one end of the sky. Then a split second later, it would reappear at the other end. It did this half a dozen or so times. Then it stopped, and suddenly I saw a brilliant red light that came out of the sky and merged with the larger light.
Wow.
At this point, my car radio emitted a loud screeching sound, and as I approached the Patuxent River, the light crossed the river, headed south, and disappeared. That was the first sighting, and the second sighting happened about 7 months later on November 20th, 58, and actually, I was standing in my father's oyster house that faced the Patuxent River at about 5 o'clock p.m.
Yeah.
When I saw a red streak of light hanging over the river. There were about 15 or so other workers with me. Then we saw 3 slender cigar-shaped objects that were moving slowly over the river to the St. Mary's County on the opposite side. Then a 4th, much larger object appeared seemingly out of nowhere.
Gordon, we're going to have to cut you off right there, but we're going to pick up the story after the break. We are going to continue our discussion with one of the leading UFO researchers in the world. His name is Gordon Lohr, and you're listening to Beyond Reality Radio.
Got this in pocket, gunpowder, I'm gonna use it. one like me. I'm special, so special. I gotta have some of your attention. Give it to me. I got rhythm, I can't miss a beat. I got new skank.
You're listening to Beyond Reality Radio, a late-night Monday program. Jason and JV have the week off. They are on vacation. My name is Bruce Markison, and glad to be talking tonight to our guest, UFO writer, researcher, editor, Gordon Lohr. Gordon, before the break, I interrupted you in the middle of your story. You were telling us about your second experience seeing a UFO in November of 1958. And you talked about seeing the three slender cigar-shaped objects. Let's pick it up from there. What did you see after that? Gordon, are you there with us? And I think we've lost Gordon again, so we'll try to get him back on the line with us. We'll be talking quite a bit about the subject of UFOs with Gordon Lohr, our special guest on this Monday night edition of Beyond Reality Radio. We're going to take your calls for Gordon a little bit later on. Our toll-free number is 844-687-7669. Again, that's 844-687-7669. Lots of ways you can follow the show. Visit our website. It's beyondrealityradio.com. Again, that's beyondrealityradio.com. And if you go to our website, please jump in the chat room and take part there. We also have a Facebook page at Beyond Reality Radio. You can follow us on Snapchat and Instagram, all great ways to keep in touch with the program, not only during the live shows, but at other times as well. And if you want to learn more about me, check out my new Facebook page, Bruce Markison's Ghostly Gallery, where I talk about horror, supernatural, the paranormal, pop culture, lots of good stuff on Facebook. So we do hope to reconnect with Gordon in just a moment. Coming up later in the week, tomorrow night's show, our guests will be Christopher Orapello and Tara Love McGuire. They are the authors of the new book, Besom, Stang, and Sword, A Guide to Traditional Witchcraft, The Sixfold Path, and the Hidden Landscape. On Wednesday, our guest will be Christopher Fulton. He has written a fascinating book, The Inheritance, Poison Fruit of JFK's Assassination. He's actually come forward for the first time to give the country and the world some answers in the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. Let's go back to our guest, Gordon Lohr. Gordon, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I hope I can stay this time, I'll tell you.
Stay right with us. Don't go anywhere. Before the break, I had to interrupt you because we had a break at the bottom of the hour, but you were telling us about your second experience in 1958. It was November. You had mentioned that you saw the three slender cigar-shaped objects, and
That's
then
correct. And
a fourth object came after that. Pick it up from there, please.
Yeah, the objects were moving over the river to the county, St. Mary's County, on the opposite side. Then a fourth, much larger object appeared seemingly out of nowhere. It came straight out of the sky that seemed to dwarf the other three UFOs. It was, and as we watched, the large object began expanding from both ends at once. Then it quickly rose up into the sky at an estimated 20,000 feet altitude. The other three objects quickly followed it. Then the larger object changed to a silvery disk and disappeared at a tremendous speed, and the other objects followed suit. And I sent all of these reports into NICAP.
How did NICAP respond?
Joined.
How did NICAP respond to the reports you sent in?
No, they didn't at first. They just kept them in the files, and it wasn't until I got on board as a member of the staff in 1965 that I found them in the files. And apparently, they didn't respond. I think I got a brief thank you letter, but other than that, they didn't respond.
Yeah. Did that discourage you at all?
No, because I know they had so many other cases that they were dealing with. I mean, they were just flooded. And after I got on board, that flood continued, particularly during the 1965, 66, and 67 UFO flaps, where thousands of people all over the world were just having these sightings. In fact, I would stay up till sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning fielding calls from as far away as Australia and Germany about UFO reports. And at the time, NICAP was the biggest UFO organization, the most renowned one in the world. So we were getting reports in like mad. Matter of fact, the mailman would bring in 2 huge sacks full of letters and reports and just lay them on the ground, on the floor. And we were knee-deep in correspondence relating to the many UFOs that people had seen during those sighting flaps.
Yeah. Was that the peak of it?
It was a very exciting time.
Was that the peak of it, do you think, Gordon, in the mid-1960s?
Well, I think so. As far as people really knowing about it, you know, today with the internet and everything else, you don't hear that much about UFO sighting flaps. So back in those days, you had blazing newspaper headlines in practically all the newspapers, you know.
Yeah.
And so people were really intensely interested. Today, that's not. There's a lot of people who are very interested, but with so much else going on in the world, and with the high technology that we have, it's hard for some of these reports to really make their way around the world so that many people know about them.
Right. Gordon, as you think back to these incidents that you experienced, 1955 and then the pair of incidents in 1958, you think back to what occurred. Do you care to speculate as to what you think it was? Do you think you're seeing some kind of alien life form? What do you think, or you just don't know at this point?
Well, I thought that was a real possibility then, and I still do, particularly after I got working with NICAP, and I began to realize that, well, first of all, you know, when you're working with a big organization, most of the reports that come in, as many as maybe 80%, can explain in terms other than something that totally can't be explained that might come from outer space. I'd say about 20%. And I think that may apply even today. About 20% of the UFO reports that come in can be labeled as unexplained. Now, whether they're actual aliens from space, who knows?
Yeah.
I personally think that we have been observed by alien life for a long time, maybe hundreds of years. My first book, Mysteries of the Skies, was published in 1968, was the first book ever published about the historical aspects of UFOs going back in time for several hundred years. And there were big sighting flaps in the 1896-97 over from California to West Virginia of what they call the airship sightings. And there were actually, I saw in the National Archives, of all places in Washington, D.C., a sighting from a whaling ship captain that in 1840, he was on his whaling ship, and he saw this silvery disc come out of the sky, come down into the water, come back up out of the water. Water was dripping off the bottom of it. Then it flew over the ship and then rose straight up and disappeared. That was in the National Archives. And another report I got from the National Archives was in 17th century, I think it was 1648, on the Muddy River in Massachusetts, before the colonies were even formed. A man was pulling a barge with several other men up down the river, down the Muddy River, when this disc came out of the sky, came down, drew the barge up against the tide, and then suddenly let it go and disappeared straight up. And that was in John Winthrop's journal.
Wow.
John Winthrop was the chairman of the Massachusetts Bay Colony back in those days.
Yeah.
And that I found in the National Archives, believe it or not.
And it goes back a long time. You mentioned
That's right.
You mentioned your sightings in 55 and 58. And then 7 years later, 1965, you're actually a folk song performer, and that somehow leads to you working for NICAP. Give us the story from there.
That's correct.
What happened? How did that
you want
develop?
me to give you a little fill-in on that?
Absolutely. Tell us the whole story. It's a great one.
Well, actually, I was singing. I had met the great balladeer Burl Ives at my father's marina in 1957, and I spent a full day with him. He and I sang folk songs together, even. And he was going down to the Florida Everglades to make the film Wind Across the Everglades, which came out in 1958. And he told me at the time that he had just signed a contract to be in a film with Gregory Peck, but it was untitled at the time, and that turned out to be The Big Country, for which Ives won his Academy Award as Best Supporting Actor. But it started with him, and so I became really interested in because I was taking guitar lessons. I became really interested in folk songs, and began taking lessons, and then I began performing at the Unicorn Coffee House in Washington, D.C. during the early 60s. And then in 1965, I was performing at a small audience in the coffee house. As a matter of fact, Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary happened to be there that night.
Wow.
And I was singing a song that I had written the music to called The Pedigreed Piddlin' Pup and 10 Piddles on a Puddle. It was a tribute to his dog that Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes had penned, and I wrote the music to that. And Peter Yarrow stood up and led the applause because he really loved the way I performed it. But in the audience was Dick Hall. Now, Dick Hall was the assistant director of NICAP at the time. And he was impressed. He invited me back to his apartment. We spent the evening together. We became good friends. And by the end of the evening, he had hired me as a staff member at NICAP. And I started my 5-year stint there only a few days later.
Wow.
So the rest is, I eventually became the assistant director, then the vice president of the organization, working with Keyhoe and James McDonald, probably the big UFO scientist at the time, along with Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek and others.
So Dick Hall trusted you enough. He didn't do any kind of a background check. He didn't say, get back to me.
Didn't. He was very impressed by my knowledge of UFOs, by my sightings, and the fact I knew so much about NICAP and Major Keyhoe.
Yeah.
And so by the end of the evening, I said I would love, to somehow be able to work with Keyhoe and work full time in the subject. And he says, well, if you would, how would you like to start? Early next week. Wow.
What happened to your?
I said, you mean you're hiring me as a staff member? And he said, yep. We just happened to have an opening for a staff member, and you're it. So
yeah. Gordon, what happened to your career as a folk singer? Did that end right there?
Pretty much, yeah. I did a few more things, but I mean, I didn't have any ambitions of becoming a full-time singer to make my living at it. I just loved doing it,
Yeah.
So because I didn't think I was that good, but I had people. As a matter of fact, remember the folk singer Judy Collins?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I met her at the Unicorn Club. We became fairly good friends, and she was talking with me about the possibility of possibly doing an album, and that was before I got interested. That was right before I joined NICAP, and after that, I didn't hear from her anymore. So
yeah,
my interest has continued really right up to this point, but I haven't been a performer in the folk song arena for many years now.
UFOs, though,
I'm still trying to keep up with my UFO activities, particularly in the last year or two since I started researching and writing my current book.
Yeah. UFO is your first love. Don't go anywhere, Gordon. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back momentarily. We're continuing a late night Monday. Jason and JV have the night off on Beyond Reality Radio. My name is Bruce Markison, and glad to be talking to our guest, expert on UFOs, Gordon Lohr. We are continuing on Beyond Reality Radio. Stay right with us. listening to Beyond Reality Radio. It's a late night Monday. Jason and JV have the night off. Bruce Marcuson, glad to be with you as guest host tonight. Our topic is unidentified flying objects, UFOs. And with us, one of the experts on this topic, without a doubt, Gordon Lohr, writer, editor, and researcher. Gordon, I'm fascinated looking through the books that you have written, because not only have you written books about UFOs, you've also edited a book on ice hockey, and you have written a novel. So you have diverse interests, without a doubt.
Yes, well, I wrote, actually it's a novel. It's a novelized biography of Sri Ramakrishna, the great Indian Hindu mystic, which is up on Amazon now. And that's a big book. That's about almost 700 pages.
Yeah. And then hockey as well.
I have. The main author of that is Neil Earl, and he was a big hockey fan and a hockey player from Newfoundland. I wrote a book on Newfoundland called The Earl Family of Newfoundland and Labrador, which was published in 2015, and about the founding family of that particular province.
Yeah. Your two most recent books having to do with UFOs, Connections, A Lifetime Journey Through the World of Celebrity, that came out in 2017, and then just this year.
That came out. That came out last year, and I have one chapter there on UFOs, and a chapter on the psychic and spiritual phenomena that I was involved in, and all the people I met, including Burl Ives, James Cagney, Robert Mitchum, two kings, 4 presidents, etc.
Wow.
It's quite a nice book.
I've
had the good fortune to meet a good many famous people in my life.
And then this year, Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth, UFO Researcher's Odyssey. Tell us how folks can acquire that book.
I'm sorry?
Tell us the best way for folks to get that book if they'd like to purchase it.
Well, they can purchase it through the publisher, Bear Manor Media, BearManorMedia.com, or they can get it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, eBay, several other outlets, or they can order it directly from me, and they can get an autographed copy, and I can send it to them. I think you have my address there.
Yep, GordonLohr.com is the website, and we'll give out your email. It's gordon.lohr, that's Lore, @gmail.com. Gordon, stay with us. We're going to take a break for just a few minutes here at the top of the hour, but we are going to continue into the second hour with our discussion on UFOs. We will take your calls as well. Our toll-free line is 844-687-7669. Again, that's 844-687-7669. We continue a late night Monday. Gordon Lohr, expert on UFOs. Stay with us on Beyond Reality Radio.
This ain't no disco. It ain't no country club either. This is L.A.
paranormal that cannot be explained by scientific methods.
Told of a creature that was 6.5 to 7 feet tall.
The CIA ran secret mind control experiments.
It's a tale of a creature that's been seen by many, but believed by few.
And experts say there have been reported sightings of paranormal activity.
And there was this creature, and it ran down this hill.
They say something was flying over their house, and they have no idea what it was.
How the world's most powerful individuals are actually shape-shifting reptilians.
My scariest ghost hunting experience.
Jason and JV.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Can't handle the truth.
Beyond reality. Radio.
Hour number 2 of Beyond Reality Radio. We are searching for the truth on UFOs. Our guest, one of the experts in this area, his name is Gordon Lohr. He has written books, hundreds, if not more, articles on the subject of UFOs. He has worked for NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And we are continuing our discussion in our second hour. Jason and JV have the night off. In fact, they're on vacation all week, so it gives me a chance to be the guest host. A lot of fun, enjoying it. For those who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. You can follow me on Facebook, my Ghostly Gallery, and also follow this show on Facebook and at our website, beyondrealityradio.com. We are continuing with UFO researcher and writer and editor Gordon Lohr. Gordon, I want to talk a little bit more about your relationship with Major Donald Keyhoe. You mentioned that you read his books back in the 1950s. That's really what got your interest in UFOs off to a roaring start. And then in 1965, after you start working at NICAP, or when you start working at NICAP, you actually have a chance to meet Major Keyhoe. Tell us about that experience.
Yes, actually, it's in my book. As a matter of fact, the first photo in the photo section of my book has a picture of Keyhoe that I took standing next to the NICAP door, it was maybe a few months after I moved there. And now Keyhoe lived about 100 miles south of where NICAP headquarters was, so he wasn't in the office all that much. He wasn't there on a daily basis by any means. He only got there maybe once a month or something like that. But I first met him. I was probably a month or two into my reign in my as being a staff member there at NICAP, and I first met him, and that was all. It was just an initial meeting. He had meetings with Richard Hall, who was then the assistant director, and others, and we discussed a few sighting reports that had come in. But that's essentially how I met him for the first time, and I was very impressed. He was a man that had a remarkable Marine Corps service record as a Marine Corps pilot. And he also did the nationwide tour for the great aviator Charles Lindbergh back in 1927.
Really?
Matter of fact, his first book was called Flying with Lindbergh in 1928. And he actually had to fly in. He flew in with Keyhoe to all of these places. And the small airports back then, of course, you didn't have things like radar and the big control towers and stuff like that. Sometimes you just had to land in a muddy field, to get to where the airport was located. And he often had to do that, and sometimes he had to go in to try to clear the runway at these modest airports because they were so crowded with people. At the time, Charles Lindbergh was the biggest name on the planet after his record-breaking flight across the Atlantic. He was the first one to solo across the Atlantic. And when he landed in Paris, as a matter of fact, he had to circle above the airport. He was afraid he was going to run out of gas, in order for the thousands of people that were jamming in the airport to get out of the way. Well, Keyhoe experienced much the same thing when he toured with Lindbergh, only a month or so after his famous flight.
Wow!
So he did that. He's also did some tours for, I think it was somebody flew over the South Pole. Now I forget. Admiral Perry or something like that. I forget the name now. But so he had quite an experience before he even got involved in UFOs.
Sometimes when we meet people we admire, we're disappointed, but that doesn't sound like it was the case with Major Keyhoe.
Oh no, that was certainly not the case with him. I was very impressed by his knowledge, his experiences, and whatnot. And as a matter of fact, there is somebody in England now, on the east coast of England, that is writing the first ever biography of Keyhoe. So there's never been a biography written about him.
Was he a full-fledged believer in alien life?
Not at first. At first, he had to be persuaded to get interested in the subject. The way that came about, I was quite interested. He was a staff member, a staff writer for True magazine back in the late 40s, early and into the 50s. And I don't think he thought much of UFOs. Don't think he was quite that interested. But then the editor of Purdy, I think his name was Ed Purdy, asked him to investigate the UFO phenomena because he wanted to write an article about it, particularly since so many of them seemed to be centered around Washington, D.C. at the time. And Keyhoe wasn't interested. Matter of fact, the editor of True had to threaten Keyhoe, had to threaten to fire him to get him interested in following up on some of these UFO reports. But then when he did, he was hooked.
Yeah.
And before that year ended, he had written the very first book and the very first article on UFOs. And that first article became, and is still, as far as I know, one of the 2 or 3 most highly read articles in the history of American journalism.
True magazine was a major publication, right?
That's right. It sure was. That was the big sort of men's magazine at the time, and there were dozens of men's magazines at the time.
Now, they didn't specialize in sci-fi topics, did they?
No, but Keyhoe had written a lot of sort of outer space things, like Buck Rogers types of stories.
Right.
People flying around in spacecraft and whatnot, but nothing specifically on UFOs until he got interested in. But after he started investigating the reports, and of course he soon became interested in forming his own organization in 1956. Matter of fact, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter was a close friend of Keyhoe at the U.S. Naval Academy. They both graduated together from there in 1920. And he brought Hillenkoetter in and made him the chairman of the NICAP Board of Governors. And Hillenkoetter later became the first director of the CIA.
Mm.
And certain other people joined the staff as well. A lot of them from the Pentagon and government that Keyhoe had been working for. Keyhoe had been working in the government, in the Commerce Department, and other places for years before he really got into the UFO field.
I want to pick up on the CIA topic a little bit later on, but just one more question on Major Keyhoe. Do you still have those 2 books that you read so many years ago? Are they still in your collection?
Yeah, I have all 5 of the books that Keyhoe read. Oh, sure, of course. Yeah. Uh-huh.
You still refer to them to this day?
Oh, yeah, I refer to them, particularly when I was writing my latest book, Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth. I don't refer to them every day or anything, but I still refer to them quite a bit now because of my own book and trying to promote that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's nice that you can retain those roots. That's what got you interested. You mentioned that you wrote 5 books.
And I've been able to get back in contact with people I haven't worked with for 50 years, you know.
Yeah.
And, people like Barry Greenwood and Jan Aldridge and a whole bunch of people from the NICAP days, Francis Ridge and others. Fran Ridge, by the way, has an excellent NICAP website that he's really doing wonderful work with. He even has a team of investigators, of people that are investigating even current UFO reports now, keeping people up to date with those through his website.
We're going to talk
NICAP.com if anybody wants to tune into that website.
So it's NICAP, NICAP.com. We're going to talk more about your day-to-day work at NICAP, also talk about the CIA connection and some of the UFO sightings that you investigated during your time at NICAP. Our guest on a late night Monday is UFO researcher, writer, and editor Gordon Lohr. You're listening to Beyond Reality Radio. Stay with us. listening to Beyond Reality Radio. It's a late night Monday. Jason and JV have the week off. Bruce Marcuson filling in as guest host. And we continue our very interesting conversation with Gordon Lohr. Actually, looks like we have lost Gordon for the moment, so we'll have to reconnect with him. Gordon is writer, researcher, investigator, editor. He has been involved with the subject of UFOs since the mid-1950s. He actually had several first-half experiences seeing UFOs, one in 1955, and then a couple of sightings in 1958. And then very interesting, while working as a folk song performer at a place called the Unicorn Coffee House. Wonder if that still exists in Washington, D.C. Gordon was performing that night, and he happened to have in the audience a gentleman named Richard Hall, who was the assistant director of NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And turns out they met after Gordon's set, and Mr. Hall was so impressed by Gordon that he hired him that night to work for NICAP, and that began about a 5-year tenure with the organization. So we're going to continue our discussion with Gordon Lohr. We are going to take your phone calls as well, 844-687-7669. Again, if you'd like to talk to Gordon Lohr about UFOs, 844-687-7669. Gordon, let's continue our conversation. Let's talk a little bit about the CIA's involvement with NICAP. You mentioned that briefly before the break. Exactly how did that come about that the CIA became involved with NICAP?
Well, they were involved from the very beginning. As I mentioned before, Admiral Roscoe Hildenkoetter, whom Keyhoe brought on board as head of the NICAP Board of Governors, was the first director of the CIA. And then later on, Colonel Joseph Bryan, who was a CIA person, came on board. He became later the president of the NICAP Board of Governors. And then other people, Dewey Fournay and others. There was also a staff member, Stuart Nixon, who came on board the staff, although his identity as a CIA operative was not known. I suspected it from the first, and I tried to warn Keyhoe and Hall that we may have had a CIA plant in our staff, but they didn't believe me. And sure enough, that's what happened, and NICAP was eventually taken over at the end of 1969. Keyhoe and I were fired, and the CIA essentially took it over.
So
they sort of ran it into the ground for about the next 8 years.
So it was that the CIA didn't trust what NICAP was doing?
I don't know. The thing is, I think they wanted to keep undercover and input there. And Keyhoe was trying to distance himself from it, from association with the CIA and trying to keep them from encroaching in on the staff. But the irony of it was that Keyhoe started the whole thing by appointing CIA people to the NICAP Board of Governors, including the chairman of the Board of Governors. But I think they wanted to just have an input there on what significant sightings were coming in. Now, in 1968, we published the first United States Air Force Projects Grudge and Blue Book reports 1 through 12 using the Freedom of Information Act. It was the first time that confidential and secret UFO reports were released to the public for the first time, and it showed a significant number of high-quality reports. That the Air Force, during the early years of Project Blue Book, did a very credible job of investigating, but then they took a wrong turn and began to poo-poo the reports after that.
When you were fired
we don't know
by
exactly why, but they did.
Gordon, when you were
Actually,
fired by the
they tried to cover it
CIA,
up the whole time, so there was some reason, whether it's because they just didn't want people to know, or my own thought was there may be a possibility that we had already even then been in contact with extraterrestrial beings or resources of some time, and we had an agreement with them, sort of like the day the Earth stood still type of thing. Maybe we had an agreement with them and still do, and but they're still trying to keep the really good reports under wraps.
we have a break coming up in less than a minute. Very quickly, when you were let go by the CIA, were you surprised, or did you see it coming?
No, I saw it coming. As I said, I tried to warn Keyhoe and Hall about it, that it was coming, but they didn't believe me for some reason. I just don't think I don't think Keyhoe thought, well, the people that he trusted to come on board were going to really oust him.
Yeah.
And of course, by the time that occurred, the famous Condon report from the University of Colorado came up and gave the whole subject a black eye. So contributions to the organization began to fall off, and the whole thing just kind of fell through by the end of 1969.
We are going to continue with UFO researcher, writer, and editor Gordon Lohr. We'll take your phone calls as well, 844-687-7669. Stay with us. This is Beyond Reality Radio. This is Beyond Reality Radio on a late night Monday. Jason Hawes and JV Johnson have the week off, and I'm filling in for them. Glad to be with you. My name is Bruce Markison, and very glad to be talking to our guest, Gordon Lohr, on the subject of UFOs. We have been talking about Gordon's involvement with NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. We will take your calls as well, 844-687-7669. Again, give us a call, 844-687-7669. Gordon, we're going to take a call in just a moment, but first of all, let me ask you what your main job at NICAP was when you first joined the organization in 1965.
Well, the main job actually was coordinating with all of the 35 or so NICAP subcommittees we had around the world, including ones in Australia, England, and all around the United States, and a couple of other foreign countries as well. And that was a big job because every time a sighting came in, I'd have to pinpoint where it came from, assign a subcommittee in that area to go out and investigate the sighting. And that's how we got our multitude of thousands of sighting reports that came in during the 5 years I was there. That was my main job. I did go out on several UFO investigations myself, several of which I have in the book. But my main job was taking care of the UFO subcommittees and also being the associate editor of the NICAP Investigator, which came out every month while I was there, and
that was like a newsletter.
I also went around the country appearing on many radio and television shows during that period as well.
Really?
So I was a public relations officer for NICAP as well.
All right, let's go to the phone lines. We'll take our first caller of the night. We have Barry on the line with us from North Carolina. Barry, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. You're on with Gordon Lohr.
Hello, Bruce and Gordon. What a pleasure it is to speak to both of you. Excuse my accent, but you just have to put up with it.
My goodness, you sound like an old waterman from the Chesapeake Bay.
As a matter of fact, I used to live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. That's right there.
That's pretty close. I know Virginia Beach well.
Well, hey, listen, Gordon, this is for you. My daddy was born in 1916 in Patuxent, Rhode Island, went to Warwick High School, graduated as a football star, and played number one on the golf team, and moved down to Pinehurst, North Carolina after he graduated in 32. This was in 1937. And then I, of course, got married to my mother, and we stayed down south. But I can remember, Gordon, my daddy telling me about when he was a teenager, 1927, 28, 29, 30, that he used to go catfishing with a buddy of his off of a pier in the Patuxent River, and during the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning, they would see what was called now UFOs, but back then they had no name for it, but they would see lights in the night. And he said, Barry, I always figured that could be some kind of alien craft flying from outer space.
That's right. Well, I lived at Sullivan's Island, right on the Patuxent River, as a matter of fact, and that's where I saw sightings that I described earlier in this program. Yes. Yeah. Yes, I know. They seem to have an interest in riverways. There were a number of sightings in the Chesapeake Bay area, and particularly in the Patuxent River later on. The Patuxent River leads right on up, almost into Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact.
Barry, we thank you for the call. Do you think there is some significance to the issue of water, and perhaps that being an attraction for these unidentified objects?
Well, possibly, because there have been a number of sightings. I think it was a guy named Sanderson that wrote a book on underwater UFOs, and there have been sighting reports of UFOs under the water. I have a few in my book, Mysteries of the Skies, as a matter of fact, and I think one or two in my current book. So they have been under the water, up in the sky, over every... it seems like in every country in the world, just about. I can't think of one that hasn't had at least some UFO sightings. Even the province of Newfoundland has had UFO sightings. So it's been all over the world and still continue to this day.
Let's go to James in Missouri. James, you're on Beyond Reality Radio with Gordon Lohr.
Hello, Gordon. Thank you for taking the call, gentlemen.
Yes,
my
indeed.
question is about the government, the United States government particularly, being interested in either suppressing or wanting to get facts about UFOs straight, because I ended up sighting one when I was up in a small Cessna plane with a friend of mine who was a pilot. We were flying from Cleveland to Pittsburgh. And we ended up seeing a UFO. It ended up lighting up the entire ground and the sky and everything else. And traffic control from the airplanes and everything else basically came across the radio and said, you guys all know what to do when you land. And my friend who was the pilot told me, he's like, we're going to land, we're going to be questioned by people. He's like, you're going to tell them that you saw absolutely nothing as long as you want to continue on with your life.
Yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I know of a case
normal,
like that
or?
where, yeah, go ahead.
I was just curious whether that was normal or whether it was in order to control the information is what I'm assuming.
Yeah, is that a normal...
Well, I think the latter. I tell you one case of my own. I was the state director for the MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, back in 1974, 75 in New Mexico, and I had a New Mexico subcommittee that I set up when I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 74, 75, and I had a lieutenant colonel who was a member of our U4 subcommittee at the time come up to me, and he said, you know, Gordon, I had investigated a crash and retrieval case. That's where, like Roswell, New Mexico, disc travels, and there were like 3 humanoid bodies and whatnot. And he said he was in one of those crash and retrieval cases, and he said, you know, Gordon, he says, I was approached by this government official, and he says, if you ever mention one word about what you did and how you participated in it, it's a big desert out there, and I'll never find your body. So that scared me. That really did, and it scares me to this day. That you would have that kind of cover-up. But to what purpose, you know? Do we really know? I mean, is it like the day the Earth stood still, or flying saucers, or the flying saucers from beyond the Earth type of thing? Have we really been in contact with UFOs and extraterrestrials these many years? I seem to think that we have been. And they're still keeping it under wraps as much as possible.
James, thank you very much for the call.
We made an agreement with extraterrestrials that we have to do this in order to maintain scientific back and forth between ETs and ourselves. It sounds like something crazy out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind or something, but who knows, you know? And how have they been able to keep it that much undercover? You think some enterprising reporter, my God, they're uncovering everything now.
Yeah.
Why haven't they got a hold of that story?
This was also the early 90s, too. Internet, things like that didn't exist. a lot easier
correct.
to keep
That's
information
correct.
under
Yeah.
wraps. But I was just curious if that was a standard practice or what
It
the
seems
fear
to be.
is,
It
basically.
seems to be, yeah. Of course, they have a new, sort of what the Project Blue Book thing out now, in which they have offices in the Pentagon. It's called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, in which they are supposedly continuing to investigate UFO reports, but they're not putting out much of anything to the public, keeping the public informed about what they're doing. But matter of fact, one of the Robert Bigelow, I think his name is, heads the program, and he says that such countries as Belgium, France, and England are far more open about UFO reports than is the United States.
Interesting.
Why
James,
they're keeping it so under wraps, I don't know, unless maybe we have made contact and are not yet ready to reveal it to the public.
we want to thank James for the call. Good question, telling us about an incident that he was involved in. I want to ask you, Gordon, about some of the UFO sightings that you specifically investigated back in the 1960s. I know there was one in 65. There was another one in 66. Can you tell us about a couple of those specific incidents and what determinations, what conclusions you came to?
Yeah, well, the one that I investigated, that was the second one I investigated, was in South Hill, Virginia, in April of 1967, and this craft that was it was a small craft that had four legs to it. It was like a sort of a barrel-shaped craft, and it had four legs. It landed on this macadam surface. And this tobacco warehouse manager, Clifton Crowder, saw it, and then later other people saw it as it took off, and he came across it in the middle of the road, and then he saw it suddenly emit, and this was late at night after he closed his warehouse. It was going home. It was about 8 o'clock at night. It was dark, and it suddenly emitted flame from the ground and lifted straight up in the air and flew over some shrubbery and trees and disappeared. Now, J. Allen Hynek, the Air Force spokesman at the time, investigated him, and he was really impressed by the case. He later told me when I met him in 1969 in Chicago that it was a very interesting case and was one of the ones that began to persuade him that UFOs were not all nonsense and they should be scientifically investigated. But that was a very interesting case. And another one I had was in Waunakee, New Jersey in 1967, in which a UFO came down over a big reservoir there, dipped down into the water, came up, emitted the water, and then flew up and disappeared. And I interviewed the police chief there and many residents. And then there was another one in southern Maryland later that same year, in which a UFO lit up a school teacher's house and came up and landed in her front yard and then took off and disappeared. So there have been several sightings like that. But my main job at NICAP was overseeing the NICAP subcommittees and being the associate editor of the NICAP Bulletin every month.
But in each case, you really felt there was some credible information from these witnesses, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, no question about it, and from many more. I mean, I wrote the book "Strange Effects from UFOs." It was the first book NICAP released that had occupant reports in it, and electromagnetic effects, physiological effects, psychological effects. We even had a panel of experts that were very experienced in all of these kind of effects that people were having, that gave the thumbs up to the reports that were in Strange Effects from UFOs.
We have time
of course,
for...
Since then, there have been hundreds and even thousands of books and articles written on the subject.
Yeah.
When my first book came out, Mysteries of the Skies, in 1968, there were hardly maybe 25 really good books on the subject. Now there are 1,000.
Yeah. We have time for one more phone call. We have with us Randy, who joins us from Indiana. Randy, you're on with Gordon Lore.
Hello, Bruce. Gordon, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Randy? Thanks.
I'm doing fine, thank you. I wanted to tell you about a sighting I had one day sitting in my living room looking out the window at about probably 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And he just kind of eased up there, and he was so transparent to the sky that I could barely see him. And so I stepped out on a porch. At the time where I lived in southern Indiana, I had a levee running through my backyard, and I walked from my backyard to the levee and stood up on the levee. And as I walked, it moved at about the same distance as I was walking. And I stood there. Yeah, I kind of stood there with my hand over my eyes, shading the sun, and watched it for a few moments, and it was observing me. And then when it finally got tired of observing me, it just like took off down the levee at like at the speed of light, and like I said, transparent to the sky, made absolutely no noise whatsoever, no sound. And then
That's amazing. You know, there's been a number of reports like that, including one I described earlier over the Patuxent River in Maryland, where these things take off at tremendous speeds and just disappeared. I mean, defy the laws of gravity or of speed. You know, it's just incredible. There've been many reports like that, and yours sounds very. As a matter of fact, I'd love to get a report of that if you care to email me something, or I'm at it's gordon.lore@gmail.com. So,
Randy, we thank you for the call, and definitely follow up by sending Gordon an email. He'd love to hear from you. We've really enjoyed this, Gordon. The 2 hours have flown by. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we want to thank you very much for being with us. And for offering us your insights, your history, your perspective over the years. It's really been fascinating. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I love it. It's been wonderful being on with you, and I apologize for the occasional mishaps with my phone here.
That's all right. And you can follow up with Gordon Lore at his website, gordonlore.com. Send him an email, and also pick up one of his many books. He has books not only on UFOs, but a number of other topics as well. Gordon, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bruce.
Gordon Lore, expert on UFOs. He has been our guest on this edition of Beyond Reality Radio. We are not quite done for the night. We'll be back to wrap things up in just a moment. Stay with us.
jacking up, so you wanna do. If I could, baby, I'd give you my world. Open up, everything's waiting for you. You can go your own way.
Wrapping up a Monday night show, Beyond Reality Radio. Again, our thanks to Gordon Lohr for joining us over the last 2 hours. Gordon's latest book, Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth, a UFO Researcher's Odyssey. And that is available right now. It's a new book, and we thank Gordon for joining us on tonight's program. A reminder that tomorrow night we'll have a little bit of a different, well, quite a bit of a different topic of conversation. We are going to be talking about the subject of witchcraft. Our two guests are Christopher Orapello and Tara Love McGuire. The discussion with them will center on their new book. It is called Besom, Stang, and Sword, A Guide to Traditional Witchcraft, the Sixfold Path, and the Hidden Landscape. So Christopher and Tara, they are witch authors and podcasters. They'll join us on the program tomorrow night. Wednesday night, we'll have Christopher Fulton talking about his book, The Inheritance, Poison Fruit of JFK's Assassination. And then on Thursday, we will have infinite investigator and author Jonathan Gabriel. That's coming up all week long right here on Beyond Reality Radio. We thank you for joining us. You can follow us at our website, beyondrealityradio.com. Also, our Facebook page. You can follow me at my Facebook page as well, newly formed Bruce Markison's Ghostly Gallery. Thanks for joining us on a Monday night. You've been listening to Beyond Reality Radio.